No one played with the millionaire's 6-year-old paralyzed son at school until a poor 7-year-old girl did something that changed everything. Before we share this tale, give it a like and comment where you're watching from, and one thing that makes you smile. The autumn wind scattered golden leaves across Riverside Elementary's playground as 6-year-old Timothy Hayes sat alone on his wheelchair, watching other children run and laugh. His small hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white with the familiar ache of loneliness that had become his constant companion. Born with spina bifida, Timothy had never taken a single step in his young life, but his bright green eyes held the same yearning for friendship that filled every child's heart. The playground buzzed with the joyful chaos of recess. Children climbing monkey bars, racing across the soccer field, and gathering in tight circles to share secrets. Timothy observed it all from his isolated corner, memorizing every laugh, every whispered conversation, every moment of connection that seemed forever beyond his reach. His specialized wheelchair, worth more than most families' cars, felt like a prison that separated him from the world he desperately wanted to join. "Timothy!" "Come inside, sweetheart," called Mrs. Anderson, his aide. But Timothy shook his head firmly. He wanted to stay, to hope that maybe today would be different. Maybe today someone would see past his wheelchair and notice the boy who loved dinosaurs, could solve math problems faster than kids twice his age, and dreamed of adventures in distant lands. Across the playground, 7-year-old Lily Martinez pressed her face against the chain-link fence, her worn sneakers barely keeping her thin frame steady. Her stomach cramped with the sharp pain of hunger. She'd had nothing but a stale piece of bread for breakfast, and that was yesterday morning. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around her hollow cheeks, and her clothes carried the musty smell of the downtown shelter where she and her mother had spent the last 3 weeks. The shelter's morning routine had been chaotic as usual. Dozens of families competing for bathroom time, the constant noise of crying babies and arguing adults, the overwhelming scent of industrial disinfectant mixed with unwashed bodies. Lily had learned to wake up early, before the rush, to wash her face in the communal sink and try to make herself presentable for school. Education was her escape, her mother always said, the one thing poverty couldn't steal from them. Lily had been watching Timothy for days from her position by the fence. While other children whispered cruel words and pointed at his wheelchair, she saw something entirely different. A boy who looked as lonely and lost as she felt every single day. Her grandmother, before cancer had taken her away, always said that kindness cost nothing but was worth everything. Right now, nothing was all Lily had to give. "Hey there," Lily called softly, her voice carrying a slight Spanish accent as she approached Timothy's wheelchair with careful steps. "I'm Lily. What's your name?" Timothy's eyes widened with genuine surprise, his heart hammering against his ribs. No child had spoken to him in weeks, maybe months. Most either ignored him completely or stared with uncomfortable pity before hurrying away. "I'm Timothy," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the playground noise. Lily's face transformed with a brilliant, authentic smile that seemed to light up her entire being despite her obvious exhaustion. "Want to play with me, Timothy? I know we can't run around like the other kids, but there's that seesaw over there. I bet if we put our heads together, we could figure out how to make it work for both of us." For the first time in months, Timothy felt his heart leap with genuine possibility and hope. Timothy stared at Lily in complete disbelief, his green eyes searching her face for any sign of mockery or cruel jest. "But I can't walk," he said, his voice thick with the shame that had become his constant companion since the day he'd first understood that his legs would never carry him like other children. "The seesaw won't work with my wheelchair. Nothing really works for me." Lily tilted her head thoughtfully, studying the situation with the serious concentration of a 7-year-old engineer determined to solve an impossible puzzle. Her dark eyes sparkled with determination as she examined Timothy's wheelchair, then looked across the playground at the old metal seesaw that had been the source of so much joy for countless children over the years. "Maybe it will work, maybe it won't," she said, with the practical wisdom that only children who have faced real hardship seem to possess. "But we'll never know until we try, right? My mama always says you miss 100% of the chances you don't take." She extended her small, dirt-stained hand toward him with unwavering confidence. "Come on, Timothy, let's figure this out together." With trembling fingers and a heart full of nervous excitement, Timothy maneuvered his wheelchair toward the weathered seesaw. The rubber playground surface made the journey smooth, but his palms were sweating with anxiety. Other children had stopped their games to watch this unusual development, some snickering behind their hands, others staring with open curiosity. Tommy Richardson, the biggest and loudest boy in 2nd grade, pointed directly at them and burst into cruel laughter. "Look at the cripple trying to play normal games. This should be good for a laugh. Watch him fall right on his face." The words hit Timothy like physical blows, each syllable confirming his worst fears about what others thought of him. His face flushed red with humiliation, and he started to turn his wheelchair around, ready to retreat to his corner of safety and isolation. But Lily's reaction was swift and fierce. She spun around to face Tommy, her small frame vibrating with protective fury that seemed to make her appear twice her actual size. Her dark eyes flashed with an anger that spoke of someone who had defended herself and others many times before. "His name is Timothy, and he's 10 times braver than you'll ever be," she shouted, with a voice that carried across the entire playground. "At least he doesn't spend his time being mean and stupid like some people I could mention. Maybe if you used your brain instead of your big mouth, you'd actually have friends who liked you." Tommy's face reddened with embarrassment as several children nearby started giggling at Lily's comeback. Something in her fierce, unwavering expression made him back away, muttering complaints under his breath, but lacking the courage to continue his attack in the face of such determined opposition. The other children gradually returned to their games, leaving Timothy and Lily alone with their seemingly impossible mission. Timothy looked at his new friend with wonder and gratitude. No one had ever defended him so boldly before. "Okay then," Lily said, rolling up the sleeves of her worn sweater like she was preparing for the most important engineering project of her young life. "Let's see what we can do here. This is going to require some serious problem solving," Lily announced, walking around Timothy's wheelchair in the seesaw with the focused intensity of a construction foreman surveying a challenging job site. Her stomach continued to cramp with hunger, but her excitement about helping Timothy experience something new pushed the discomfort to the back of her mind. She examined every angle, every possibility, her young brain working through the mechanics of how to make this impossible dream become reality. Timothy watched her with growing amazement. No adult had ever taken his desires so seriously, yet this 7-year-old girl was treating his wish to play on a seesaw like the most important mission in the world. "Can you transfer from your wheelchair to other seats?" Lily asked, her tone completely matter-of-fact, free from any hint of pity or awkwardness that Timothy had grown accustomed to hearing from adults. "Like, if I help hold you steady and make sure you don't fall, do you think you could slide onto the seesaw seat?" Timothy had never attempted such a thing outside of physical therapy sessions, with professional equipment and trained adults supervising every movement. The idea terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. But something about Lily's unwavering confidence, her complete faith that they could overcome any obstacle together, made him believe it might actually be possible. I think so," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I can use my arms pretty well, and my balance isn't too bad when I'm sitting down. I just need something steady to hold on to." "Perfect!" Lily exclaimed, clapping her hands together with genuine delight. "I'll be your steady something. My mama says I'm small but mighty. I might not look like much, but I'm tougher than old boots and twice as stubborn." Ooh, with careful precision and Lily's steady hands supporting his shoulders and back, Timothy began the slow, nerve-wracking process of transferring from his wheelchair to the lower seat of the seesaw. Every muscle in his upper body strained with the effort, and his heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "You're doing amazing," Lily encouraged, her voice filled with genuine pride and excitement. "Just a little bit more. There, you made it." As Timothy settled onto the seesaw seat, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of the metal beneath him instead of his familiar wheelchair cushions, Lily scrambled onto the opposite end with the agility of someone who had spent years making the most of limited playground opportunities. Slowly, magically, the seesaw began to move. For the first time in his entire life, Timothy rose into the air under his own power, experiencing the simple joy of playground equipment that every other child took for granted. The sensation was absolutely magical, like flying, like freedom, like everything he had ever dreamed of but never dared to hope for. "Higher! Push higher!" Timothy laughed, his voice carrying pure, unbridled joy across the playground for everyone to hear. The sound was so genuine, so filled with happiness, that even some of the children who had been watching skeptically found themselves smiling. Lily pushed against the ground with her worn sneakers, sending Timothy soaring upward again and again. Her own laughter mixed with his, creating a beautiful melody of friendship that drew curious, increasingly friendly glances from other children who were beginning to see Timothy in an entirely new light. "This is officially the best day of my entire life," Timothy called out as he rose toward the sky once more. For 20 precious, magical minutes, Timothy wasn't the disabled boy that everyone pitied, avoided, or whispered about in hushed tones. He was simply Timothy, a regular kid playing with his friend Lily, experiencing the pure, simple magic of childhood that had always seemed as distant and unreachable as the stars themselves. Lily continued pushing against the ground with her worn sneakers, sending Timothy up again and again with determined enthusiasm. Her own laughter mixed with his, creating a joyful symphony that seemed to transform the entire atmosphere of the playground. Some of the other children had begun to approach cautiously, perhaps seeing for the first time that Timothy could be just another kid having fun, just another member of their playground community. "Tell me about those dinosaurs you're always reading about," Lily called out during one of Timothy's upward flights. She had noticed him with dinosaur books during library time, always sitting alone but completely absorbed in the colorful pictures and fascinating facts. Timothy's face lit up even brighter if such a thing were possible. Finally, someone wanted to hear about his passion. The Triceratops had 3 massive horns and could weigh as much as 4 cars put together. And the T-Rex had teeth that were longer than school rulers. They could bite through almost anything. Lily listened with genuine fascination, asking thoughtful questions that made Timothy feel important, intelligent, and valued. Did they all live at the same time? Could a Triceratops beat a T-Rex in a fight? Her curiosity was authentic, not the polite interest adults sometimes showed before quickly changing the subject. "Well, that's a really good question," Timothy began, launching into an enthusiastic explanation about different prehistoric periods and dinosaur behaviors. For the first time in his young life, he had someone who genuinely wanted to hear what he had to say, someone who didn't look at him with pity, awkwardness, or uncomfortable sympathy. But as the minutes passed, Lily's pushes against the ground became noticeably weaker. Her face had grown pale despite her continued smile, and small beads of sweat appeared on her forehead despite the cool October weather. The hunger that had been her constant gnawing companion for the past 3 days was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore or push through. Her vision began to blur slightly around the edges, and she felt her legs trembling beneath her small, undernourished frame. The excitement and physical exertion of playing had used up what little energy reserves her body had been clinging to desperately. "Are you feeling okay, Lily?" Timothy asked with growing concern, his sharp eyes noticing how his friend had started to sway slightly on her side of the seesaw. "You look kind of pale all of a sudden." "I'm perfectly fine," Lily whispered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. The playground had started spinning around her like a carnival ride, and she felt her strength leaving her body like air escaping from a punctured balloon. "Lily?" Timothy's voice seemed to come from very far away, even though she knew he was right there beside her. "Lily, what's wrong?" The world tilted sideways as her small body finally surrendered to the effects of prolonged malnutrition and exhaustion. The world tilted sideways for Lily as her undernourished body finally surrendered to days of hunger, exhaustion, and the physical demands of playing. She collapsed beside the seesaw, her small frame hitting the playground's rubber surface with a soft thud that sent waves of terror through Timothy's entire being. "Lily! Lily!" Timothy screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic and desperation. He tried desperately to reach for her from his position on the seesaw, but he couldn't get down without assistance. He was trapped, helpless, to aid the first real friend he'd ever had. "Somebody help us, please! Somebody help her right now!" Mrs. Anderson came running across the playground, her sensible shoes pounding against the asphalt as she rushed toward the emergency. Several other teachers followed close behind, their faces filled with concern and professional urgency. They quickly surrounded Lily's unconscious form, while other staff members helped Timothy transfer back into his wheelchair with gentle but efficient movements. "Call 911 immediately," Mrs. Anderson shouted as she knelt beside Lily, checking her pulse with experienced fingers. The little girl's heartbeat was rapid but weak, her breathing shallow and irregular. "This child appears to be severely malnourished. We need paramedics here right away." Timothy wheeled his chair as close as physically possible to where Lily lay motionless on the ground. Her face was deathly pale, almost grey, and her breathing came in quick, shallow gasps that terrified him more than anything he'd ever experienced. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked frantically, tears streaming down his cheeks in hot rivers of fear. "Please tell me she's going to be all right. She's my friend, my only real friend." At that exact moment, as if summoned by Timothy's desperate need, a gleaming black Mercedes sedan pulled smoothly into the school's circular driveway. Robert Hayes stepped out with the confident stride of a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his carefully ordered life. At 42 years old, he had built a software empire worth over $300 million through intelligence, determination, and ruthless business acumen. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for the heart-wrenching sight that awaited him. Robert had arrived to pick up Timothy early for their weekly appointment with Dr. Peterson, the pediatric specialist who had been monitoring his son's condition since birth. It was supposed to be a routine visit, just another item checked off in their precisely scheduled lives. But instead of finding Timothy waiting in the main office as usual, he'd been directed urgently to the playground where a medical emergency was unfolding. "Timothy!" Robert called out, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the asphalt as he hurried toward the crowd of adults gathered around a small, unconscious girl. His heart raced as he took in the scene, paramedics arriving, teachers speaking in urgent whispers, and his son crying harder than he'd seen him cry since the dark days immediately following his diagnosis. "Son, what happened here? Who is this little girl?" "Daddy, it's Lily." Timothy sobbed, reaching out for his father's strong, familiar hands with desperate need. "She was playing with me on the seesaw. She was the first person who ever wanted to play with me, and then she just collapsed. She's my friend, Daddy." My only real friend in the whole world, and now she might die. Robert knelt beside his son's wheelchair, his heart breaking into pieces at the raw pain and terror in Timothy's voice. As the paramedics carefully lifted Lily's limp form onto a stretcher with professional precision, Timothy grabbed his father's sleeve with desperate, white-knuckled urgency. His small hands shook with fear and adrenaline as he struggled to explain the most important thing that had ever happened in his young life. "Her name is Lily Martinez, Daddy, and she's 7 years old," Timothy said, his words tumbling out in a rush of emotion and panic. "She's the very first person who ever wanted to play with me, who didn't look at my wheelchair and walk away. She helped me get on the seesaw, and we were having the most amazing time. But then she got sick and collapsed. You have to help her, Daddy. You have to make her better." Soon, Robert watched with growing understanding as the ambulance doors closed with a metallic finality that seemed to echo across the playground. His analytical mind, trained by years of complex business negotiations and strategic problem-solving, was already processing the situation with laser-sharp focus. He had built his fortune by seeing opportunities others missed, by identifying problems and implementing solutions with precision and unlimited resources. But this wasn't a boardroom challenge or a software glitch. This was about his son's first taste of real friendship, and he could see how desperately Timothy needed this brave little girl to survive and recover. The sight of his son's tear-stained face, the raw emotion in Timothy's voice when he spoke about having a friend, struck Robert with the force of a physical blow. In 6 long years of watching Timothy struggle with isolation, depression, and the daily challenges of his disability, he had never heard such genuine joy mixed with such devastating fear in his son's voice. "Mr. Hayes?" Mrs. Anderson approached with careful steps, her expression grave and concerned. "I'm afraid Lily's situation is quite complicated and heartbreaking. She and her mother, Maria Martinez, are currently staying at the downtown homeless shelter. The child has been showing clear signs of severe malnutrition for weeks now. This isn't the first time she's arrived at school without having eaten anything substantial. We've tried to help when we could, providing extra snacks and free lunch, but there's only so much we can do within school policy." Robert's jaw tightened as the full picture became crystal clear in his mind. While his son had been sitting alone every single day, longing desperately for connection and friendship, this incredibly brave little girl had been fighting battles that no 7-year-old should ever have to face. Yet somehow, despite her own overwhelming struggles with poverty and hunger, she had recognized Timothy's need and reached out with pure kindness and selfless generosity. "Which hospital are they taking her to?" Robert asked, already reaching for his phone with the decisive movement of a man preparing to take immediate action. "Seattle Children's Hospital," Mrs. Anderson replied quickly. "But Mr. Hayes, I should warn you that Lily's mother, Maria Martinez, is an extremely proud woman who has been through tremendous hardship. She's been struggling to make ends meet ever since her husband was deported back to Mexico last year. She might not accept help or charity easily, no matter how well-intentioned." Robert looked down at Timothy, who was clutching his wheelchair's armrests so tightly that his knuckles had turned completely white with strain and desperate hope. "Daddy, can we please go see her at the hospital?" Timothy pleaded, his green eyes filled with more raw emotion than Robert had ever seen before. "I need to make sure she's going to be okay. She saved me today. She made me feel like I actually mattered to someone." In that pivotal moment, Robert Hayes made a life-altering decision that would change 3 lives forever. The pediatric ICU at Seattle Children's Hospital hummed with quiet efficiency as Robert and Timothy arrived 3 hours later, having navigated through rush-hour traffic, with Robert making urgent phone calls to ensure Lily received the absolute best care available. The sterile corridors echoed with the soft beeping of medical equipment and hushed conversations between medical professionals who moved with practiced urgency throughout the brightly lit hallways that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. Lily lay small and fragile in the hospital bed, looking even tinier, surrounded by the complex medical equipment that monitored her vital signs with electronic precision. An IV line delivered much-needed nutrition and fluids to her severely dehydrated body, while oxygen tubes helped support her weakened respiratory system that had been compromised by weeks of malnutrition. Her dark hair was spread across the white pillow like spilled ink against fresh snow, and her usually vibrant spirit seemed diminished by the medical crisis that had brought her to this frightening place filled with unfamiliar sounds and antiseptic smells. Beside her sat a woman who could only be her mother, the same delicate bone structure, the same determined chin, but aged beyond her 31 years by hardship, worry, and the constant stress of trying to survive in a system that seemed designed to crush people like her beneath its bureaucratic weight. Maria Martinez wore the same clothes she'd had on for 3 days straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she maintained a vigilant watch over her daughter with the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had already lost too much in her young life. The room carried the antiseptic smell of hospital disinfectant mixed with the subtle anxiety that always lingered in pediatric intensive care units, where families faced their worst fears while hoping desperately for miracles. Machines beeped softly in rhythmic patterns, monitoring heart rate, blood oxygen levels, and other vital functions that the medical team needed to track carefully during Lily's recovery process from severe malnutrition and dehydration. Maria looked up as Robert and Timothy entered the room, her brown eyes immediately wary and defensive like a wounded animal protecting her young from potential threats. She had learned through bitter experience to be suspicious of wealthy men who appeared during her family's most vulnerable moments, especially when they wore expensive suits and carried themselves with the confidence that only significant money and privilege could provide in a world that had shown her little kindness. "You are Timothy's father," she said in carefully measured English, her accent thick with exhaustion and stress from hours of worry and sleepless nights spent wondering if her daughter would recover fully. "The nurse, she told me you have already paid for all of Lily's medical treatment, every test and procedure and medication. I cannot accept this charity from strangers, no matter how generous your intentions. We do not take handouts, no matter how desperate our circumstances become or how much we need the help right now." Robert studied Maria carefully, recognizing the fierce pride that years of poverty and struggle hadn't been able to strip away from her spirit, the same inner strength that had sustained her through her husband's deportation and months of homelessness. He saw the same unwavering determination in her eyes that he'd witnessed in her daughter's brave decision to befriend Timothy despite her own overwhelming circumstances and personal struggles with hunger and uncertainty. "Mrs. Martinez, my name is Robert Hayes," he said with genuine respect and warmth in his voice, extending his hand in a gesture of equality rather than charity. "Your daughter gave my son something today that all my money could never buy: genuine friendship and acceptance. She saw past his wheelchair and treated him like any other child deserves to be treated, with kindness and dignity. That gift is absolutely priceless to our family, and we'll be forever grateful." "Mama?" Lily's weak voice interrupted the tense conversation, her eyelids fluttering open as she slowly regained consciousness after hours of medical intervention and IV fluids working to restore her depleted system. Her first instinct was to look around the unfamiliar room with confusion and concern, searching for familiar faces while trying to understand where she was and what had happened to bring her to this strange place. "Timothy, are you okay? Did I scare you when I fell down on the playground? I'm so sorry if I ruined our fun." Hi! Timothy immediately wheeled his chair as close to the hospital bed as the medical equipment would allow, reaching out to gently touch Lily's hand with infinite care and overwhelming relief that his friend was finally awake and talking. "I'm perfectly fine, but I was so worried about you. The doctors say you're going to be completely better, though. You just need to eat more good food and get lots of rest to build your strength back up to where it should be." I'm sorry I ruined our fun on the playground," Lily whispered, her voice still weak but filled with genuine concern for Timothy's feelings and the memory of their magical time together on the seesaw. "The seesaw was honestly the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to me in my whole life. I never want you to think that collapsing was your fault somehow, because it wasn't. You made me happier than I've been in months." Robert felt something fundamental shift and crack open in his chest as he watched the genuine interaction between the two children, seeing depths of caring and maturity that seemed far beyond their young years and limited life experience. Timothy had never looked so completely animated, so thoroughly engaged with another person in all his 6 years of life spent largely in isolation from his peers. And despite her own serious illness and frightening circumstances, Lily's first concern had been for his son's emotional well-being and feelings rather than her own physical discomfort. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the hospital room's large windows, casting gentle patterns across the floor as Robert made a decision that would change the trajectory of multiple lives forever, a choice that went beyond business calculations or financial considerations. He had built his fortune through calculated risks and strategic investments, analyzing market trends and profit margins with mathematical precision. But this felt entirely different. This was about family, about giving his son the gift of genuine friendship and human connection that no amount of money could purchase. "Mrs. Martinez?" Robert continued quietly, his voice filled with sincerity and purpose as he chose his words carefully. "I'd like to propose something that I hope you'll consider very carefully and thoroughly. My son desperately needs friends. Real friends who see him for exactly who he is as a person, not his disability or our family's wealth or social status. Your daughter has that incredibly rare gift of seeing people's hearts rather than their circumstances, looking past external differences to find the human being underneath." Maria's eyes widened with shock and confusion as Robert continued speaking, his words carrying the weight of a life-changing proposition that seemed too good to be true after months of rejection and disappointment. After endless cycles of rejection, closed doors, and bureaucratic obstacles that had left her feeling defeated and hopeless about their future prospects, the idea that someone might actually want to help them seemed almost impossible to believe or accept as reality. "He'd like to offer you a position with my company, Hayes Technology Solutions," Robert explained, his voice steady and professional, yet warm with genuine sincerity that couldn't be faked or manufactured. "We desperately need someone in our customer service department who speaks both English and Spanish fluently, someone who understands what it means to work hard and overcome seemingly impossible obstacles with grace and determination. The position comes with comprehensive health insurance coverage for you and Lily, a competitive salary that will allow you to support your family with dignity and independence, and real opportunities for advancement based on merit, dedication, and performance." Maria stared at him in complete disbelief, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing through the exhaustion and stress that had clouded her thinking for so many months of uncertainty and fear. A real job offer, not charity, not pity, but actual employment with dignity and purpose, was the last thing she had expected from this encounter with a wealthy stranger whose son had befriended her daughter on a playground. "You know nothing about my qualifications, my work history, or my professional capabilities," Maria said carefully, her voice trembling slightly with a mixture of hope and deep-seated caution born from too many disappointments and broken promises. Why would you take such a significant risk on someone like me, someone you've never met before today and know nothing about beyond this hospital room? Robert's expression grew more intense as he glanced toward the hospital bed where Timothy and Lily were whispering together about dinosaurs and playground adventures, their friendship already creating a bond that transcended their different circumstances and backgrounds. Mrs. Martinez, I've built my career on reading people, on identifying character and potential that others might overlook or dismiss without proper consideration, Robert replied with conviction and certainty. I know your daughter has more genuine courage, kindness, and inner strength in her 7-year-old heart than most adults will ever possess in their entire lifetimes. That tells me absolutely everything I need to know about the woman who raised her with such incredible values, moral character, and compassion for others. Tears began flowing down Maria's cheeks as the full magnitude of what was being offered finally sank into her consciousness, representing not just employment, but hope for a future she had almost stopped believing was possible for her and Lily. 3 weeks later, Lily Martinez walked through the front doors of Riverside Elementary with confidence she'd never possessed before in her young life, her head held high and her steps sure and steady with the security that came from proper nutrition and stable housing. Her once hollow cheeks had filled out with proper nutrition and regular meals. Her hair shone with health and vitality that reflected her improved circumstances, and she wore a brand-new backpack filled with school supplies that Maria had been able to purchase with her first paycheck from Hayes Technology Solutions. The transformation in the Martinez family had been nothing short of miraculous, exceeding even Robert's most optimistic expectations for how quickly their lives could change with proper support, opportunities, and the stability that steady employment provided. Maria had thrown herself into her new position with dedication and gratitude that impressed even Robert's most experienced managers and senior staff members, bringing a level of care and attention to customer service that had already earned recognition from clients throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Her natural empathy and multilingual skills made her invaluable in resolving complex customer issues that other representatives struggled with. And she'd already received multiple commendations from clients who appreciated her genuine care, attention to detail, and ability to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. The steady income had allowed them to move from the crowded, chaotic shelter environment into a modest but clean 2-bedroom apartment, just 6 blocks from Timothy's house, within walking distance of the school and neighborhood amenities. For the first time in over a year, Lily had her own bed with clean sheets that smelled like lavender fabric softener, her own space to study and play without constant interruption, and the psychological security of knowing they wouldn't have to pack up their few belongings and leave at a moment's notice. The apartment wasn't luxurious by any means, but it was theirs, a place where they could build new memories and plan for a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility and hope. "Lily!" Timothy called out excitedly as he spotted his friend entering the building, his voice echoing through the hallway with pure joy and anticipation that had been building for weeks. His wheelchair moved smoothly across the polished floors as he hurried to greet her, his face absolutely radiant with happiness that seemed to emanate from his very soul. The past 3 weeks had been the longest of his young life, filled with daily phone calls to check on Lily's recovery and careful planning for their reunion at school. "Timothy!" Lily responded with equal enthusiasm, her voice strong and vibrant in ways it hadn't been during their first meeting on the playground when hunger and exhaustion had weakened her small frame. She rushed over to him, No longer weakened by malnutrition or exhaustion, her energy restored and her spirit soaring with the knowledge that she had a true friend waiting for her return to school and normal childhood activities. Mrs. Anderson watched the reunion with tears in her eyes, having witnessed firsthand the remarkable changes in both children over the past few weeks of separation and recovery. Timothy had become more engaged in class discussions, more confident in social situations, and had even begun attempting to connect with other classmates who had previously seemed unreachable or uninterested in including him. The anticipation of Lily's return had given him a sense of purpose and joy that transformed his entire demeanor and approach to school, learning, and social interaction. "I have something absolutely amazing to tell you," Timothy said, practically bouncing with excitement in his wheelchair, his green eyes sparkling with the kind of happiness that comes from sharing wonderful news with someone who truly matters to your heart. "My dad arranged everything with the school administration and the district office. You're being transferred into my class permanently. We're going to be together every single day now, learning the same lessons and sharing the same experiences." Lily's eyes widened with delight and surprise, her face lighting up with the kind of pure joy that only children can express without reservation or self-consciousness. "Really? We'll be in the same class for the rest of the school year? That's honestly the best news I've ever heard in my entire life." She paused, her expression growing more serious as she processed the magnitude of what had happened and the kindness that had been shown to their family. "Timothy, I want you to know that you probably saved my life that day on the playground. If you hadn't been my friend, if we hadn't been playing together, I might have collapsed somewhere else, where nobody would have found me in time to get medical help." Timothy shook his head firmly, his expression earnest and determined as he corrected her misconception about who had saved whom. "You saved mine first, Lily. Before you talked to me, I felt completely invisible, like I didn't matter to anyone except my dad and the adults who had to take care of me. You made me feel like a real person, like I belonged somewhere in this world and had something valuable to offer other people." 6 months after that life-changing day on the playground, the transformation in all their lives had exceeded even Robert's most optimistic expectations, creating ripple effects that touched not only their immediate family, but the entire school community, the business world, and countless other families facing similar challenges. Timothy and Lily had become inseparable best friends, their friendship serving as a bridge that connected them to an ever-widening circle of classmates who had learned to see past differences and embrace inclusion as a fundamental value rather than just a nice idea. Maria Martinez had been promoted twice at Hayes Technology Solutions, her natural leadership abilities and innovative problem-solving skills earning recognition throughout the company and from clients across multiple industries. She had enrolled in evening business classes at the local community college, determined to build a future that would provide even more opportunities for herself and Lily while honoring the dreams and sacrifices her mother had made to give them a chance at a better life in America. The Martinez family had moved again, this time into a beautiful 3-bedroom house just 2 blocks from the Hayes mansion, with a spacious backyard where Lily could play safely and a vegetable garden where she helped her mother grow tomatoes, peppers, and herbs that reminded them of their grandmother's traditional recipes and cultural heritage. The house represented stability, permanence, and hope in ways that their previous living situations in shelters and cramped apartments never could have provided for their emotional and psychological well-being. Robert had found himself profoundly changed by the experience as well, discovering aspects of parenting and human connection that his business success and financial achievements had never taught him about what truly mattered in life. Watching Timothy blossom through genuine friendship had opened his eyes to priorities he'd never fully understood. leading him to work fewer hours and spend more quality time with his son, while also establishing a foundation focused on providing resources and support for children with disabilities and their families throughout the Pacific Northwest. But it was on a sunny April afternoon, exactly 6 months after their first meeting, that the most significant revelation would occur, one that would shake the very foundation of everything they thought they understood about their interconnected stories and the mysterious forces that had brought them together against all odds. Lily was at the Hayes house for their regular Saturday playdate, working on a school project about family history in Timothy's spacious bedroom that overlooked the carefully landscaped gardens behind their house. They had spread photos, documents, and poster boards across the expensive carpet, creating a detailed timeline of important events in their families' backgrounds, with the kind of methodical attention to detail that both children had inherited from their respective parents and their shared appreciation for thoroughness. "This is my absolute favorite picture of my grandmother," Lily said with deep reverence, holding up a faded photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes and gentle hands that had comforted her through many difficult nights. Her name was Elena Martinez, and she was honestly the strongest, most amazing person I ever knew in my whole life. She raised me when Mama had to work 3 jobs just to pay rent and keep us from being homeless, and she always made me feel loved and safe no matter how scary things got. Timothy examined the photograph with genuine interest, studying the woman's features with the careful attention he always gave to things that mattered to Lily and helped him understand her background better. Then suddenly his face went completely pale as he stared at the image with growing recognition and disbelief that made his hands tremble uncontrollably. "Lily," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion and confusion as impossible connections began forming in his mind. "What did you say your grandmother's last name was before she got married to your grandfather? What was her maiden name?" "Rodriguez," Lily replied, confused by Timothy's sudden change in demeanor and the strange intensity that had appeared in his voice without warning. "Elena Rodriguez Martinez. She came to America when she was very young, all by herself with just a suitcase and a few dollars, looking for better opportunities. Why are you asking? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost, or something terrible has happened." With shaking hands, Timothy reached for a silver-framed photograph that always sat on his nightstand, a treasured image of a woman he'd never met, but had heard countless stories about throughout his entire life. He held it up beside Lily's photograph, and the resemblance was absolutely unmistakable, shocking in its clarity. "Lily," Timothy said, his voice barely above a whisper, as the truth began to dawn on him with overwhelming force. I think your grandmother was my father's sister. I think Elena Rodriguez was my Aunt Elena, the one who disappeared when my dad was young, and our family was separated by tragedy and circumstances beyond anyone's control." Robert Hayes sat in stunned silence in his home office, examining the evidence that Timothy and Lily had presented with the methodical precision of someone trying to process information that challenged everything he thought he knew about his family's history and the cosmic forces that had brought them all together. Spread across his mahogany desk were photographs, immigration documents, birth certificates, and family records that painted a picture he had never imagined possible in his wildest dreams or most desperate hopes for family connection. Maria Martinez sat beside him in the leather chair that had been hastily pulled up to the desk, her own hands trembling as she held her mother's old immigration papers and family letters that she had kept stored in a worn shoebox for decades, treasuring them as the only tangible connection to a past that had often seemed more like distant mythology than actual history that had shaped their lives. Tears streamed down her face as she read passages in faded Spanish handwriting that mentioned "mi hermano Roberto," my brother Roberto, with love and desperate longing that had persisted across decades of separation, uncertainty, and failed attempts to reconnect with family members scattered by immigration and economic necessity. Elena talked about her little brother Roberto constantly throughout my entire childhood, Maria whispered, her voice thick with emotion and disbelief as the pieces of a decades-old puzzle finally began falling into place with stunning clarity. She said he was brilliant and determined, that he had the kind of mind that could solve any problem if given the chance. She told me he had stayed behind in Mexico when she came to America because the family couldn't afford to bring both of them at the same time, and she planned to send for him once she got established and could provide proper support. The weight of lost years hung heavy in the room as Maria continued. She tried for years to find him, writing letters to every government agency she could think of, visiting immigration offices whenever she could afford to take time off work. But the systems were so different then, so much more complicated and difficult to navigate for someone with limited education and resources. Robert's voice was hoarse when he finally found the strength to speak, his successful businessman's composure completely shattered by the revelation that was rewriting his understanding of his own life story and the choices that had shaped his path. My sister Elena was 10 years older than me, practically more like a mother than a sister after our parents died in that terrible car accident that changed everything. When our parents were killed, I was only 8 years old, scared and confused, and the family was scattered by social services who didn't understand the importance of keeping us together or the bonds that held our small family unit together. He picked up one of Elena's letters, written in the careful English she had worked so hard to master, despite having no formal education beyond elementary school and limited access to language learning resources. The paper was yellowed with age and worn from handling, but the love in every carefully formed word was still evident decades later, a testament to her determination to maintain connection across impossible distances. Elena was already 18 when the accident happened, legally an adult, but emotionally still just a teenager herself, and she decided to come to America for better opportunities and the chance to build a life that could eventually include me, Robert continued, his voice breaking with the weight of lost years and tragic misunderstandings that had shaped both their lives in ways they never realized. She wrote to me faithfully for 3 years, sending money when she could scrape it together from her wages as a restaurant worker, making detailed plans to bring me to Seattle, where she'd found steady employment and was slowly building a foundation for our future together. Robert's hands shook as he held the faded letters, but then the letters stopped coming completely, and I never heard from her again. I thought she had forgotten about me, started a new life in America, and decided that a young brother with his own needs and problems didn't fit into her new world or her plans for success and independence. Maria shook her head emphatically, more tears falling, as she corrected the painful misunderstanding that had separated the siblings for decades while they lived just a few hundred miles apart, never knowing how close they were to finding each other and healing the wounds of separation. She never stopped looking for you, Roberto. Never. Not for a single day until cancer took her from us when Lily was just 4 years old, Maria said with absolute conviction and fierce protectiveness of her mother's memory. She kept writing letters to every address she could find, contacted immigration services repeatedly, even hired a private investigator with money she couldn't afford to spend when I was in high school and we were already struggling financially. But your adoptive family had moved you to a different state for better opportunities, changed your records to protect your privacy and give you a fresh start, and she could never track down any trace of where you'd gone or how to reach you. Mommy. 1 year later, Timothy and Lily stood together on the same playground where their extraordinary journey had begun. But everything had changed in the most beautiful and profound ways imaginable, creating a legacy that would inspire generations of children to come. The autumn leaves danced around them in golden spirals, carrying whispers of the magical transformation that had touched not only their lives, but the entire school community, their neighborhood, and countless families throughout the Pacific Northwest who had heard their story. Timothy no longer sat alone in the corner, isolated and forgotten by classmates who didn't understand his worth or see past his physical limitations. Instead, he was surrounded by a diverse group of friends who had learned to see past his wheelchair and embrace the intelligent, funny, and deeply caring boy who had always been there waiting to be discovered and appreciated. His confidence had blossomed like a flower finally receiving sunlight after years of darkness, and his natural leadership abilities had emerged as he became an advocate for inclusion and acceptance throughout the entire school district. Lily had grown strong and healthy, her once hollow cheeks now full of life and vitality, her eyes sparkling with the security and happiness that came from knowing she was loved, supported, and valued by family who would never let her face the world alone again. She had become one of the top students in their class, her natural intelligence flourishing under the stability and encouragement that proper nutrition, stable housing, and a loving home environment provided consistently day after day. The playground that had once been a place of loneliness and exclusion had been transformed into a symbol of acceptance and friendship that attracted visitors from other schools and communities. The old seesaw, where they'd first played together, had been refurbished and dedicated as the Friendship Seesaw, with a bronze plaque telling their story to inspire future generations of children to look beyond differences and find connection in the most unexpected places. "Can you believe it's been exactly 1 year since we first played on that seesaw?" Timothy asked, his voice filled with amazement at how dramatically their lives had changed through the power of simple kindness and family bonds that transcended time, distance, and seemingly impossible circumstances. "Sometimes it still feels like a beautiful dream that I'm afraid I might wake up from, but then I remember that this is real, that we're really family." Lily squeezed his hand gently, her smile radiant with joy and gratitude that seemed to emanate from her very soul and touch everyone around them. "It's not a dream, cousin. It's our reality now, and it's more wonderful than anything I ever dared to imagine when Mama and I were living in that shelter, wondering where our next meal would come from and whether we'd have a place to sleep each night." Their families had merged in ways that went far beyond legal documents or shared addresses, creating a network of love and support that honored Elena's memory while building something beautiful for future generations to inherit and continue. Robert and Maria had developed a deep friendship built on mutual respect, shared values, and their commitment to raising their children with love, purpose, and an understanding of how blessed they were to have found each other against all odds. Maria had completed her business degree with honors, and was now Robert's full partner in the Hayes Martinez Foundation, established in Elena's memory to provide comprehensive support for immigrant families and children with disabilities. The foundation had already helped dozens of families navigate complex systems and access resources that transformed their lives, creating ripple effects of hope and opportunity throughout communities that had previously been underserved and overlooked. Timothy had become the Foundation's youngest spokesperson, sharing his story at conferences and events to inspire other families facing similar challenges, proving that disability didn't define limitations, but rather highlighted the importance of creating inclusive communities where everyone could thrive and contribute their unique gifts to the world. "I keep thinking about what Grandma Elena would say if she could see us now," Lily mused, her voice soft with reverence for the woman whose love had somehow reached across time and space to bring them together in the most miraculous way. She always believed that family finds a way to reconnect, no matter how impossible the circumstances seem or how many obstacles stand in the way. She'd probably say it was always meant to be this way. Timothy replied with a grin that reflected pure contentment and joy that came from knowing he belonged somewhere in this world. And she'd be absolutely right. Everything that happened, me being lonely, you being brave enough to talk to me, your mom getting the job with my dad, us discovering we're family, it was all leading to this moment when we finally became the family we were always destined to be, connected by love that transcends everything else. As they walked toward the school building together, their story had become legend, inspiring countless acts of kindness and acceptance throughout their community and serving as proof that miracles still happen when hearts are open to love.